Hi everyone. Happy Wednesday. We're waiting for people to join us. Hi. Hi everyone. Good to see you all. We are going live with Dr. Deanna Minich today, and I'm going to invite her in a minute. And you can drop, you have any questions in the comment or the question bubble, and we try to go through the questions. Hi from Azerbaijan. Hi, good to see you all. So if you hear me good, just wave so I know that the connection is good and you can hear me. Oh, thanks, Mary. If you have any questions, Dr. Minich is the best person about nutrition, about functional medicine, about supplements. So it's a very interesting talk, especially focusing on women's health and perimenopause. So don't miss the talk, and let me just call and invite. Hi from Pakistan. Good to see you.
I made it. Hello. Good to see you.
Hi. Great. Dr. Deanna. Do you mind if I call you Dr. Deanna?
That's perfect. You can just call me Deanna. That's fine. Whatever's best.
Great to have you here today.
Oh, great to be with you. I've been looking forward to this. We've been planning it.
I know.
Great.
So, if you don't mind to introduce yourself for all the viewers, I know a lot of people know you, but we will listen again about yourself, what you're doing, and a little bit of your story.
Sure. So I would say I'm a nutrition researcher, nutrition scientist by training. So I have a master's and a PhD in science fields, so medical science, nutrition. And after I finished my study, I decided that I wanted to apply the information. So I went into the food industry, then I went into the dietary supplement industry, and then I also went into clinical practice. So I'm a certified functional medicine practitioner, as you are, and I'm also a certified nutrition specialist. So I spent some time in clinical practice, but I also evolved my practice to doing more groups, doing more online programs to make it more accessible to people. I've also written a number of books. So one of the areas of my focus is detoxification. And I teach for the Environmental Health Advanced Practice module for the Institute for Functional Medicine. So I would say you gave a very nice introduction. I mean, basically nutrition, supplements, women's health, melatonin, phytonutrients, and detoxification. These are the general platforms that I spring from.
Beautiful. I love it.
Yes, Dr. Jeffrey Bland has been my teacher, and many of your listeners, I believe, do know who he is. He's the father of functional medicine.
He's amazing. I met him earlier this year in Chicago, and yourself.
Yes, I remember. You were in the front row, I think.
Yes.
Talks, right?
I'm always sitting in the front, so you won't miss me. So let's dive into the juicy part, and I know people can't wait to hear you. We live in this toxic environment and lots of hormone disruptors causing so much inflammation, all these chronic disease, metabolic dysfunction, diabetes, fatty liver, obesity, and then we have perimenopause women who are going through the change, as you mentioned, and talking about hormones and the rainbow of hormones. They go through all these changes with their estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, insulin, and melatonin, your hormone, as well as cortisol, the stress hormone. So they are going through these changes, and imbalances and inflammaging. So if we want to focus on nutrients and nutrition, so I know, I mean, we have hormone replacement therapy as a management plan, but it's one dimension. There's so many other factors we want to focus, and in this case, is nutrition. You talk a lot about nutrition. You're the best person. So how to help? I know we're talking very general, but and we have to go personal and individualize things. But what are the general thought or recommendation on nutrition?
Yes. Well, first and foremost, just as you mentioned, nutrition needs to be personalized. And when a woman starts to go through perimenopause, there's no better time to get to understand your body and its exposure to different environmental toxins. So what I would do and what I have done and what I recommend is, number one, get your genes tested. Know your gene variants, because from that, you will know about your nutrient needs, your hormones and your hormone metabolism, and your vulnerabilities and even strengths as it relates to metabolism of certain compounds. You only have to measure your genes once. Your genes aren't changing, but your epigenome is changing. So I would say, first and foremost, that's the first stage. You can do that. It's probably about $300 in order to get those data. Yeah, but it does give you a lot of information about supplementation, and it will tell you if you perhaps more than others do. For example, vitamin D receptor is a gene variant that people can get assessed, and people who have a gene variant in that vitamin D receptor do not utilize vitamin D as well. So they may actually need more vitamin D or more support. And as a perimenopausal woman, you would want to know if you have a VDR gene variant so that you know how to properly align your bone health support going into the menopause and then eventually into postmenopause. So I would say, first and foremost, the genes. Second, twice per year, get your laboratory tests done. So that can be done through a physician, a primary care provider of some type, looking at complete blood count, complete metabolic panel, also looking at various nutrients, toxic metals, which can interfere with hormone metabolism. So I think, you know, Dr. Mark Hyman has a great platform called Function Health, where you can get upwards of 140 different biomarkers twice per year for about $500. And that's what I recommend to most people, because it's all synthesized in one place. And many times people get lost through the perimenopause because they go to their hormone doctor, they go to their primary care doctor, they go to their nutrition professional. They're trying to put it all together. And sometimes it would be nicer just to have it all in one, synthesized and summarized by a clinician with a dashboard. So there are different ways to do that. So obviously, I mean, I recommend working one-on-one with a practitioner to really get to know your physiology, because through the menopause, you're changing constantly. So your protein needs are going to be changing. They're going to go up. Your fat needs may change. This is where the omega-3 index is important. We want to see about 8% of the red blood cells being EPA and DHA. So people are at about 5 or 6%. They are not even at 8%, even when they supplement. And that's important for inflammation. And then I think looking at fiber, one of my principles in nutrition is diversity and rotation, meaning that don't do the same thing over and over again. You want diversity of fiber to create a diverse gut microbiome, which will better protect you against things like toxins and also for better nutrient status. So I think from that perspective, you know, my 4 principles in nutrition are color, creativity, diversity, and rhythm. And each of those 4 are also lifestyle factors. So yes, and we can go into, those are just some general principles about macronutrients, places to start. I can see that Terrence is writing in about different phytonutrients, which I'm also very passionate about. Those are all great anti-inflammatory foods that compounds that he's mentioning there. So phytonutrients, I think you saw me at IFM this year talking about
Yes.
polyphenols. And what about polyphenols, when I think of gut health, I think of the 3 Ps: the prebiotics, the the probiotics, and then phenols, which can turn into postbiotics. So the polyphenols are in plant foods exclusively, and we find them in red, blue, purple, black, and brown plant foods. So things like berries, cherries, spices, coffee, cocoa. These are just some of the examples. And of course, some green foods and other colors, but the primary colors for polyphenols are blue, purple, black, brown, red, and a little bit of green.
So more
and
darker.
The darker, exactly. And that's what's making them dark, the polyphenols. So when we take those in, they act as anti-inflammatory components. They may start to modulate our stress response. But what I find most interesting is the effect that they have on our endocrine system, and from the aspect of circadian rhythm and helping our body to stay in sync with seasons. There's more and more literature on that now. And so that's why it's so important to eat foods in season, because the foods that are in season at our particular location are most likely priming us to better survive in that environment.
Absolutely.
But not a bag of Skittles. I see that comment always comes up, by the way, like, oh, that just means, more candy. The colors here are ones that we find in nature.
Someone is writing about ginger, omega-3, turmeric, and organic honey. Yes. So it's again, so we have all these lovely, beautiful phytonutrients, epinutrients, but the question is, does it matter, especially for women, when to eat them, how much of it, and what combination is it? Because we hear so many different types of diet, and then some people say just eat lots of protein or fat, so macronutrients, carbohydrates, or low carb. So it could be very overwhelming for women, especially when you listen to all these different podcasts and gurus. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, without knowing a person's genotype and phenotype and what they have access to, it's really difficult. In fact, if you do, again, I'm just going to go back to the gene test. If you look at a genetic variant test, it will tell you if you're efficient at burning carbohydrate, if you need additional fats. Some people are more physically primed to be more ketogenic, or some people do better with carbohydrates and other people do not. But how that unless we start to look into our constitution? We can do it through trial and error. And of course, there are some general principles for everybody to follow that are common sense, like don't eat ultra processed food, don't have artificial flavors and dyes. But when we start to get into the healthier, I would say the macronutrients, and knowing the nuance, like should a person have increased saturated fat, or will that cause metabolic endotoxemia? And so you can find out through different genetic tests how you metabolize. So take the guesswork out of it and just really concrete about your genes and what works best for your body. I know that it just takes a lot of the guessing out of it, and it gives people a better sense of confidence so that they don't spend a lot of time for all of the different diets that they could be trying out. Now, if we just say, okay, Deanna, what is the most well-studied diet? It truly is the Mediterranean diet. When you look at the literature, out of all of the science, it's not paleo, it's not ketogenic, it's not vegetarian, it's not vegan, it's not carnivore, it's the Mediterranean diet. And what is the Mediterranean diet? Fresh foods, lean protein, healthy fats, and typically limited amounts of dairy, limited amounts of sweets, moderate amounts of things like red wine, or, things that we would consider trying to keep that in balance. But what if you're not from the Mediterranean? What if you're not one of those 16 countries. Should a person from India be eating the Mediterranean diet? Should a person from Japan be eating the Mediterranean diet? I question that. Is it really well suited for different ancestries?
Mm-hmm.
So, and we look at, what else is in the Mediterranean diet? We see a lot of polyphenols. In fact, extra virgin olive oil, one of the benefits of that is not the fat. It's actually the olive polyphenols that are in the fatty acid matrix. So it's like a delivery system of those potent olive polyphenols. And that's why unfiltered olive oil is one of the best. Dr. Akil, I had posted it on my story yesterday because he was talking about how to discern a healthy olive oil. Having one variety, Koroniki is usually a good one, because what you see is a lot of adulteration in olive oil. So making sure it's unfiltered, cold pressed, organic, in a dark glass bottle. So, there are some things like that we think about from the Mediterranean diet that are probably good for most people. But I do think that we need to honor our ancestry. Where are we truly from? Can somebody from Africa, different parts of Africa, they're all diverse. Should they be following a Mediterranean diet? What about Australia? I mean, I just think that we have to take our ancestry versus where we live all of our adult life and where we're choosing to live based on the means that we have, the accessibility to certain foods. We have to kind of put it into an equation that makes sense, I think. So it's hard. It's hard to say, what should all women be doing? What I think all women need to be doing as they go through perimenopause is start to look at their exposure. Let's talk now about some of the endocrine disruptors, because sometimes women fare poorly through perimenopause, not because their hormones are up and down, but because of how they're metabolizing those hormones. And how they're turning them into hydroxylated metabolites, methoxylated metabolites, and eventually excreting them through the urine and even the stool. And in fact, there was a paper I was reading this morning looking further at toxic metals and essential minerals. And women really need to pay attention to minerals. And when I say minerals, I mean essential minerals like calcium, iron, zinc, selenium. And each of these has a deficient and a toxic range, just like a toxic metal would. And many of these minerals compete with metals. So I'll just give you an example, like iron and arsenic. They have kind of a competitive relationship. Selenium and mercury, kind of a competitive relationship. So if a woman has thyroid issues and she has issues with selenium and iodine and vitamin A and vitamin E and a number of the nutrients for thyroid, there could also be some connection there into looking at heavy metals, toxic metals. So I think a woman going through perimenopause, she needs to be looking at her minerals, because throughout her life of menstruation and every month releasing blood, we start to change the minerals. We start losing iron, and our minerals are different throughout the menstrual cycle. So as a woman goes into perimenopause, she may have deficiencies that are prime her for heavy metal toxicities. So get your minerals on straight. I would say, and soils are very depleted of minerals, even when we eat a really good healthy diet. And many times it's hard to absorb minerals from a supplement because they also compete together. So you have a certain amount of calcium with magnesium. You have to look at zinc and copper, a certain ratio there. So I think that that's one place to start, is aside from the macronutrients, so protein, carbohydrate, and fat, where most people focus their energy, I think we need to look at the micronutrients. We need to start to look at those minerals, which run a lot of our pathways, which act as cofactors and play a role in detoxification. So I think it's something that's overlooked. One of the things I like is to look at a good electrolyte blend for women. How can you bring in a healthy salt? Like the salt that I like is Himalayan crystal salt. And many women have adrenal imbalance as they go into perimenopause. So their salts are off. Their glucocorticoids like cortisol are off. Their mineralocorticoids like aldosterone are off. So they're craving salty food, right? This is a sign that they've been in this hypocortisol state for some time. So make sure that they have things like a full spectrum salt with many trace minerals, in addition to potentially supplementing with certain minerals. So anyway, I'll stop there because
So
there's
you
you say.
to recap is it's best practice to do some functional lab and not just to guess. And someone was asking about this genetic testing, which is a one time you do at once. So where they can find it for the viewers who not sure or don't have access, which if there is a brand or where they can see or get this test done.
Well, I like a couple of them. So I like 3x4 Genetics. 3x4 Genetics is great because they only test gene variants that you can do something about. So it's not like sequence genome. They only give you what there's literature to support, diet and lifestyle. The other one that I like that will tell you a little bit about your macronutrients and how to eat is called Nutrition Genomics. And all of these are about the same price point. And with Nutrition Genomics, you can get a bit more information about, just things about the timing of eating and also about types of fats that would work for you. So each of the tests, I would say, go to the websites. I'm not employed or I'm not connected to any of these companies. I just like them. I like the 3x4 Genetics. Genova is another one, Genova Diagnostics. So that was probably the first test that I had done personally. And then I started to recommend it because they have a profile called Detoxogenomics. And the Detoxogenomics panel will give you specific genes related to the metabolic detoxification pathways. So then you'll know if you have a deficiency in methylation type of gene variants. And methylation is important for estrogen in our bodies in terms of moving estrogen out of the body. So if we have an issue with methylation, we can have an issue with toxic estrogen in our body.
That's why one of the tests that I normally run is the Dutch test, the urine test. So that gives a bit of information about the methylation and estrogen metabolites too.
Yes, the Dutch test is great because it tells you how functional your genes are. You know, you have genes, but then there's, well, what is the function? How well are those genes performing? That would be some kind of metabolic test like the Dutch test, which is, they have one test called cycle mapping, where you track your urine for a whole month so that you're looking at the metabolism of all the different hormones, even melatonin. So it's a very, very complex picture, and it will tell you, oh, you have a deficiency or this pathway is in red. So yes, I think it's important to be looking at not just the genes, but the function of those genes and how they all act.
Amazing. So we talked about nutrients and food. We can move to now detox and cleansing, which you do a lot of research on. So we do have different organs: our skin, kidneys, gut, liver, and lungs. All these are the main organs for detoxification in our body. So again, how to try and help women and guide them in detoxification. Again, do you do certain tests to know if there are certain toxins in the body, or you just come up with the general detox and cleansing recommendations?
Well, I would say mostly I just try to apply a diet and lifestyle program first. And then when people don't get better, then there's this space to go further and do a deep dive. But in general, when I have done the elimination diet from the Institute for Functional Medicine, within about 21 to 28 days, I had seen people clear 50 to 70% of their symptoms. Like, it's really powerful just to look at food and what it does. But for some people, they still have lingering issues, right? So in those cases, then you would go further and perhaps do additional testing, liver function tests, looking at the individual hormone metabolites. But in general, let's go through the organs that you mentioned, because I think that that's a good way to talk about detox. So let's start on the outside, the skin. What you can, the skin tells a lot about one's, I would say, toxin load. And for perimenopausal women and women in general, women tend to use more personal care products than men. It's been estimated that women before breakfast or early in the morning has applied something on the order of 12 different products to face, body, hair. And men, about 8 to 9, but you know, that varies per person. So when you are going through, I would say for girls and women to do this early, because we need to look at non-toxic makeup, non-toxic hair dye. So many women paint their nails, or what about tattoos, or what if, I mean, all of these things are informing our hormones and changing them, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And even something so simple like, you know, nail polish. I mean, I remember I was doing a nutrition physical exam and I wanted to look at this person's protein and mineral status. And to do that, I wanted to look at her fingernails, but I couldn't because things were covered up. But actually, it's information. It's information about our inside. So looking at our personal care products, looking at lotions, even looking at the containers that we have them in. Is it glass or is it plastic? You know, because many of us have fatty creams that are in plastic containers, and that's not a good mix because a lot of those plasticizers migrate through the fat into the cream, and then we smear it on our face every day or our bodies, right? Deodorant. You know, there's even thought now that we shouldn't be showering as much as we do. Are we ruining our skin microbiome? In the literature this past week, there was a study on the scalp microbiome. So we have microbiomes everywhere. Even our face has a different microbiome depending on the location of whether it's the cheek, the forehead, the nose. Just different bacteria live on our skin. So I'm very passionate about the skin because most times people do a detox because they feel like they're not sitting well in their skin. They feel like they're breaking out. They have rosacea. They have eczema. Skin is actually like the first entry point for many people into detox. So that's why I start there. Secondly, I think about, let's just go to the gut, because in my sequence, I first want to be sure that the gut is working well before we start to ramp up the liver and kidney and other things. Like, is the gut moving? Bowel movements, 1 to 2 per day, well-formed stool. You know, it's amazing how many people don't really have awareness around their bowel pattern and how important that is and what that says about toxicity. And for many women in the perimenopause, they are recirculating estrogen because they have an unhealthy gut microbiome that is taking off a glucuronide group and allowing that estrogen to recirculate. So for some women, it looks like they have an excess of estrogen, but that's not because of what their body is making. It's because of what their body is recirculating because their gut is out of balance. So yeah, you know all of this, and I'm just bringing it to the forefront.
Very good.
So getting the gut going, having good healthy fiber, rotating fiber, not just psyllium, but having things like rice bran, arabinogalactan, guar gum, flaxseed meal. I like to rotate because each of those individual fibers, they have different properties. Some like to bind certain toxic metals more than others. Some create different gut microorganisms differently than others. So rotating fibers every 3 to 4 days. I like very diverse blends and lots of hydration too. And that's the kidneys, that the kidneys are important for pH and making sure that we have proper excretion and we're not reabsorbing again. And that's mostly due to the pH of the urine. So hydration is overlooked. You know, most people aren't drinking enough. And even very low amounts of hypohydration have been implicated in things like cognitive impairment. So like if you have brain fog or you can't think straight, it's really important to be making sure that you have enough fluids and water. So, you know, I think it's difficult to know exactly how much water people need, but in general, in functional medicine, we say about half your body weight in ounces. So if you weighed 150 pounds, about 75 ounces. But again, I like electrolytes. I like to use Sole, which is a hypertonic kind of a salt solution where you take a spoonful of that into water. So you have a more absorbable type of water. Because I think some people just drink water and then they just eliminate it quickly. They're not really taking it up. So I think water is important. It's important for the skin. It's important for the brain. And then we get to the brain detoxification, proper sleep. You know, in fact, part of the reason, you know, we see melatonin spikes at night between 2 and 4 a.m. is when our pineal gland, in response to darkness, produces a lot of melatonin. And melatonin tracks with a lot of antioxidant defenses like glutathione, catalase, superoxide dismutase. All of those peak at night. And if you look at some of the literature on the lymphatic fluid flux, when do we clean our brain and clear it out and wash the brain, so to speak? It's at night. So this is really important. In a detox, we don't often talk about brain detox, but we need to, because an organ like everything else, and it needs to be cleared of the amyloid proteins, the peptides, any kind of hyperphosphorylated tau proteins. So the brain needs to clean just like the kidneys and the gut. So then
you talked about sleep and brain. Just jumping in the middle of your talk. It just reminds of myself and perimenopause. As soon as I hit perimenopause, it's just like waking up every single night around 2 or 3 a.m. So this, I put it down first to having young kids and looking after. Now they're grown up and I still have that kind of a clock that I wake up. Then I heard from other perimenopause women who going through the same sudden awakening in the middle at around 2 or 3 a.m. So I don't know if you ever had the experience, which is not pleasant, or but that is something that it's interesting and very common.
It's extremely common. In fact, it was I've had people mention this to me as the 2 a.m. wake up club. Like there are so many people where this is a very common time. So it could be because of many things. You know, one thing is that it could be from dysregulated blood sugar. So it's perimenopause, all the hormones are changing. And when we tug on cortisol or estradiol or progesterone, we're actually tugging on the insulin and blood sugar response, glucagon, all of that. So we have to be very attentive to our blood sugar. And sometimes blood sugar can go down very low at night, and that could wake us up. The other reason might be because of melatonin. Melatonin goes down with age. That might be changing our circadian rhythm. That might wake us up. Now, in traditional Chinese medicine, if we look at different chronotherapy, they would say that liver time is between 1 and 3 a.m. Isn't that interesting? Because the liver, as our primary detoxification organ, at least to traditional Chinese medicine chronotherapy, that would be a peak time. And it syncs very nicely with melatonin and syncs well with brain. So to me, I'm just going to put this together. I think it's the liver brain axis time where there's a lot of metabolism, a lot of activity potentially between liver and brain. So if a woman is having this repeat wake up at that time, I would suggest looking at fasting blood sugar, looking at postprandial blood sugar response, even maybe wearing a continuous glucose monitor to track with sleep. That informs brain health and liver health. Possibly doing a liver detoxification to see if that could just help with smoothing out sleep. I have many perimenopausal menopausal women think about that with hot flashes and night sweats, but the liver is key. And if we want to kind of close on the detox with liver, because the liver is like the general of the detoxification army. The liver giving commands to all of the organs, like, do this, let's package up those lipids. And of course, I also want to mention that the lungs are important, you know, the lymph is important, but the liver is, again, like the general. So the liver contains so many different enzymes that changing up how we move things through into the urine, into the bile, and then into the gut. So things to help the liver would be primarily, I think of two things. This is what I tell my students when I'm teaching detox. I say protein and plants. And the reason why is we have phase 1, phase 2, and then ultimately phase 3, or the excretion. And so protein forms the basis for many of the enzymes. In fact, I was just had a student in the graduate course that I teach in at the University of Western States, and she was asking, how much protein do we need for detoxification? And right now, protein guidelines are being, I would say, reevaluated. I don't think we know for detoxification, but there was a study from 1976 in which they showed that a 44% protein diet helped with the excretion of a metabolite compared with, I think it was a 10% or a much lower percent. So protein increases metabolism through the liver. So we have to keep that in mind, not to go too high either, but maybe higher when we have increased detoxification need. And then the plants are important because when we start to detoxify, we create free radicals. We create and generate a lot of reactive oxygen species. So we need different phytonutrients and even different vitamins and other antioxidant compounds to protect the organ systems as they do that. So of course, I love greens of all types, like dandelion. I think of you know, stimulating and making bile and then causing greater bile flow. Different amino acids can also act as conjugates and help with phase 2. So having taurine, you know, sulfur, having glutathione, all of these, you know, just even methyl groups. This is so important for proper detoxification. So protein and plants when it comes to the liver. Some people might think of, oh, well, what about milk thistle? What about glutathione supplements? What about N-acetylcysteine? I mean, all of this is important, but at the basic level, we want protein and then an overlay of antioxidants in some way. And then, of course, to work with a practitioner to find out what else we need and what we might be deficient in.
That's right. Someone is asking, can you define perimenopause? Wondering if I missed this and don't know much about it.
Well, perimenopause is where we start to have more changes in our hormone levels. So estrogen or estradiol, which is the more biologically active estrogen, it starts to change. So we might start to get symptoms where our sleep starts to change. We're not sleeping so deeply. Our periods could change where we might have an extended menstrual cycle. Like instead of menstruating every 28 to 30 days, now we're menstruating every 30 to 35 days. I think that's one of the first telltale signs is the menstrual period starts to change and the amount of flow and the amount of symptoms that we have starts to change. And, you know, there could be many other changes. There are laboratory markers that will denote how we are in peri or how if we've arrived at menopause. Menopause is when we've had 12 months of no period, and those have to be consecutive months. So if we've had no period for 4 months and then we get a period, then we start the clock all over again. But menopause is essentially like the day that you have completed 12 months of no period. And perimenopause can be 10 to 15 years before that. Be a long time. And then for most women, we're going to spend most of our lifetime in postmenopause. The average age at menopause is 51. So if we think of women living longer now, which they are, so the average age, depending on the country that you live in, is in the 70s or the 80s, like 75 to 82.
Mm.
So a woman is living in postmenopause for about a third or more of her life.
Mhm.
And that means you have to be attentive to our bone health, which can change, our breast health, our brain health. I mean, these are some of the bigger issues. And that's why many people are now talking about menopause hormone therapy or longer term bioidentical hormone therapy in order to support the greater longevity that we now have and we have not had for decades past. And I know that you talk about that with your viewers here, and that advocate of looking at HRT, BHRT, MHT. So that's good. I think it's important to be looking at that.
And you mentioned, so again, perimenopause, what I see in my practice, and I hear a lot from others, is about sudden change of mood, mental health, and anxiety, sudden onset of depression, very commonly, again, due to change of hormones and inflammation. And you mentioned about cleansing and detoxification. So we sometimes forget about spirituality and the mental health, especially during this time, as we see so many women suffering with depression. So what do you recommend about stress reduction and all those very important things that we forget?
Oh, I love that question. That's like my I do feel that when a woman goes through perimenopause and then she goes through menopause and eventually she comes out the other side of postmenopause, this is a huge transformative time. This is when, I mean, usually women are in their 40s and 50s when this happens. And so she starts to think about her life. If she's had children many times, she becomes an empty nester. If she is in the professional workforce, she starts to reevaluate her meaning and her purpose. And she starts to think about who she is at a deeper level. Because, I think about each decade as a connection to even chakras, right? So I think of 0 to 10 is we're forming who we are, our identity, right? This is kind of like the root part of us. It's cortisol, it's adrenals, it's survival. Then we move into our teen years, 11 to 20, and we're all about relationships, hormones. We are in our prime of exploring our sexuality, our sensuality, our creativity. Then we move into our 20s, which is all about the solar plexus. It's all about the fiery aspects of making our name in the world. What does that mean? Getting ourselves up professionally, working, burning our energy, and making a go externally, right? And then we move into the 30s, and by that time, many people have started families or they have children. They're in the heart, they're in the aspect of compassion and taking care of others, but not maybe so much taking care of themselves. In the 40s, we move up to the throat chakra, which I associate with speaking one's truth, being authentic. And here's where in the 40s, I think, and this is when many women start to go through perimenopause, now they start speaking their truth. They have held back so much, so many thyroid issues, all the sensations in the throat, in the stuck throat, the sore necks, the shoulders that feel burdened. Now this starts to liberate. Now they start to get healthy and start looking at this aspect. And then as we go into the 50s, I think we kind of move on up to the brain. We move up into the pituitary gland, or what ancient traditions would call the third eye. So this is the seat of wisdom. This is the seat of intuition. A woman, I feel, comes into her intuitive self in her full seat of wisdom as she is going through menopause. She's transforming, right? This is why women write their memoirs. They start writing books. They get out there. They start a new business. They now have the wisdom that their life experience has amassed. And then in their 60s, 70s on up, this is truly a very spiritual time. This is when they start thinking about interconnection. They start reflecting on meaning and purpose and legacy. And so I think that every decade has a theme. And for every woman, it could be a little bit different. But when you ask me, well, Deanna, what do you think about mental health? I feel like it's an opportunity. I feel like Dr. Lisa Mosconi and others that are talking about the changes in the brain, what this is leading us to is our greatest potential. This is the second half of our life to be fully embodied and empowered to be truly who we are. And we may not have lived that way in the first part of our lives because we were experiencing, and now we move into this place of we might feel depressed or anxious or, you know, have some mood swings initially. But I think like all symptoms, they can take us somewhere. So I feel like journaling, this is where women can sign up for yoga. They might want to do more retreats. I often, and what I have been doing now is taking women on retreats and guiding retreat experiences. I feel like this is where women can benefit, is going deeper into reflection, because she has her own wisdom. Now it's time to bring it out. So that's what I feel about mental health, that, you know, it is a unique period. I think that menopausal depression is different from other kinds of depression. To me, it's almost like a dark night of the soul to transform and come out in a different way of, again, being fully feminine and connected into our source of being. So I have a lot of passion for that because I've actually gone through it myself. You know, I spent most of my life being a people pleaser. How is everybody feeling? I don't want conflict. I want to just make sure everybody is okay. And then I realized I'm burning out. I have compassion fatigue. I am doing so much for everybody else, and I'm not really focusing on self-care, self-nourishment. So now at 53, I feel like, you know what? I am who I am. I'll do the best I can. And I feel like it's like a coming home. It's a coming home. It's like I lived my whole life in order to be now more accepting of who I am. And now I don't have the throes of the hormones to throw me off. It's very, very simply, it feels very grounded. And I feel like for all the women listening, if you're going through perimenopause and you're feeling like you're just fragmented, you can't focus, for many people, I feel like what happens is that once you go through menopause, you'll come into a more grounded place. But going through that tunnel of changing and recalibrating our hormones can throw us off. Hormones are really powerful. So I feel like get your toolkit out, get your community revved up, connect with other women, follow you, you know, learn the information, get your health team lined up, get your full on support, because you want to arrive at a much higher, deeper place on the other side of menopause. And you can do that. I feel like we just need a structure and we need to focus on self-care.
Yeah, you put it so well, everything in place beautifully. You just explained everything. So I hope everyone listened, and I will go back through all this talk. Beautiful. What about exercise? So we talked about nutrients, we talked about circadian rhythm, sleep, and also about stress management and exercise again during perimenopause. Some people go with very strenuous and cardio or strengthening resistance. So it's again a lot of mixed confusing information out there for women. I know, of course, you and I, again, we see it should be personalized and individualized, but in general, what are your thoughts on exercise?
Well, you and I are very aligned. I would approach nutrition and physical activity in the same way. So for every woman, it's going to be different. And there is the musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause. And some women, yes, you and me, we go through pains that we've never had with more, and whether it's the spine, the back, the knees, the joints. So you don't want to be just lifting heavy when you have all of this pain, inflammation, or whatever is happening in your musculoskeletal system. You really need to listen to your body. Working with a physical therapist, working with a personal trainer, you've got to just take this, go low and go slow, right? Build up. But I do think, so I'll just tell you my experience. For my whole life, I've been doing yoga. I even became a yoga teacher. I was super bendy, very flexible, and I would get massage almost every week. So like I was really, my muscles were soft and supple. And then I went through perimenopause And I had a lot of changes, and I realized, oh, wow, what's happening to my sacrum? What's happening? Why do I have this soreness? I had not even had injuries. So I went to a physical therapist, and it was very illuminating because she said, you're so flexible that now you're hyper flexible and you're not strong. You need to get strong.
Mm-hmm.
You need to work on your muscle. You need to stretch, and you need to build strength and power. So I have been doing that. That is something I'm not good at, but I am working towards it. And every day I am doing stuff. I am stretching, I'm walking. I try to get diversity in physical activity. So I'm not overstretching, over sore.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really trying to listen to my body in the process while I'm also trying to get results.
Yeah.
This is something, it's just like a constant, I've got to watch myself and watch my body, tune in. And, it's like my body is teaching me something, right? Like when we have soreness. And so, I feel like for everybody, there's always like one thing. It's good to work on something for yourself, because if you had nothing to work on and everything was perfect, that'd be pretty boring. So for like body, I thank my body for being there for me to work on, like sculpture. It's like a sculpture, right? So it's like, okay, I want to sculpt in a different way. And so I keep imagining that, and I'm connecting my brain and my imagery to my body as I'm working out. So yes, I have joined a gym. I like to be in nature. I think you have to do things you enjoy and that give you energy, right? So I live in a forest, and I walk around with my husband. And so find something you like,
Mm-hmm.
find something to push your body. Maybe you do need to push yourself harder, or maybe you need more yin building activities, more yoga. Maybe for somebody listening, it's more yoga and softer flexibility exercises rather than strength. I get a little bit nervous when I see a lot of people out there on social media with really heavy weights, and then women thinking that they should just go to the gym and just like do these deadlifts. And it's like their body's not prepared. It's like we need to work in the direction of that,
Yeah.
but not ourselves so much that we are going to hurt ourselves. More is not always better in this case. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm inspired. I'm inspired by a number of the women out there that do
Yeah.
top activity. And I think it's important. It's definitely important as part of our full picture of health.
So one last question. Someone asked about supplements. Again, this is I know you work on supplements and lots of knowledge about supplements. So choosing the right supplements. Some people go shopping Costco or these big supermarkets and buy these huge giant boxes of supplements, throwing like Smarties up. So again, sometimes we have to bear in mind these could be more harmful rather than benefit to our body. So what are the criteria you choose the right supplements, or you recommend and advise people?
When it comes to supplements, I would say it makes sense to take what you actually need. And for many people, they take things and they don't really know if they're experiencing a benefit, which is why working with a practitioner is really important. If you can do that, I think it's a really smart way to handle your health, and actually probably more cost effective. Because I've seen, so when I was in one-on-one private practice, people would bring in like a big bag of all of their supplements, and I would start going through them like, this is junky, this is junky. You don't need this, that you're taking too much of this. And what most people don't do is they don't line up their supplements and then look for potential toxicity. Like they take too much zinc and now they have dermatitis, but they didn't think about that. Or do they have too much B6, which is commonly in supplements for mood, energy, hormones, sleep. I have found many people take too much B6 and they may actually have symptoms like neuropathy, right? Tingling fingers and hands from excessive B6. So you have to be super smart. I'd rather have a quality product, something that is certified good manufacturing practices. That's called CGMP, which implies that somebody was looking in on that supplement company and doing third-party testing, right? There are all kinds of regulations for that. So I think if you don't know, you should always go to the practitioner, because the practitioner would have vetted, most likely,
Yeah.
what would be a good supplement brand, right? And so I think that that's the best way to go about it. So don't spend your money on all these products, because so many of them look like the shiny object. It's like, you need to be taking this, and you're taking this and that. And sometimes we overlap. We have too much of the same type of active.
Bottles, yeah.
Yeah, it's duplicate. It's duplicative. So I think it's important to work with a practitioner, because you might actually have to rotate supplements too. You might need certain things one month, and then the next month you might need other things, because maybe you're transitioning through seasons, or you have certain symptoms. So all I would say is be really smart about your supplements. And there are different platforms. Like one of them that I like for practitioners is called Natural Products Database. If you're a member of the Institute for Functional Medicine, you actually get a free subscription, and I use them all the time, because you can look at the dose, the toxicity. They don't talk about brands per se and what would be best, but at least you get an idea of the breadth of science and the evidence behind that particular nutrient or herb, whatever it is. And there are others too, Natural Standard and so many other ones, but the science is always changing. That's why every morning I wake up to PubMed alerts on different articles, and I'm reading things like whether it's about collagen or creatine or any number of things. I think that all of that science is very dynamic and always changing.
Yes. Yes. So let people here know where they can find you. So you said you're not seeing patients one-on-one anymore?
No, not more, but I do. What I would say is probably the best thing is to go to my website, deannaminich.com. And if you sign up for my newsletter on the website, you can get, on a weekly basis, you can find out when I'm doing an event somewhere. So I might do like an in-person program somewhere, or a retreat. I might be speaking where you're at. I do a lot of speaking and a lot of travel. So that would be some way. And then I also have an online Facebook group called Nourish Your Whole Self. And I do sometimes some free programs within that group. I haven't done a long time. I've been very busy, but I like to offer a lot of the literature. So sometimes I'll just that's where I posted the scalp microbiome. I don't do a lot of my posting on Instagram. Instagram is more like pretty pictures. But on my Facebook group, I'm like posting stuff and letting people know, hey, I just found this study. High selenium, low selenium are both implicated in diabetes, stuff like that. So I like to get the word out as a scientist so that people can have better information on their decisions.
Hey, listen, it was great having you. Finally, we made it, as you said.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It was great. Thank you. And we enjoyed all the knowledge you shared with us today. And hopefully I see you sometime soon.
Oh, I'm sure we will. I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
All the best.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.